Bezrat Hashem, we're today learning the third parak of Rambam, Hilchot Teshuvah. Oof.
6:33.
It's that time of year, folks. In this parak, we're going to talk about Shabbat Tov. I'm going to say here that maybe one of the underlying concepts in this parak is the concept of achrayut, of responsibility. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin says, "Bishvili nivra ha'olam," the world was created for me. And it doesn't mean that I get to take what I want from the world. It means that I am uniquely responsible for taking care of the world. There's, those of us who have dealt with children or employees or just people in our social circle or whatever, and giving somebody something and then they misuse it, and you say to them, well, you weren't supposed to use it that way, and they say, but it's mine, you gave it to me. But that's not the point. That there's you're supposed to get a proper use out of it, not a misuse out of it. I didn't give you a car so that you could drive it into a brick wall. I gave you a car so that you could, use it as a car is supposed to be used. So the world is given to us. This is one of those Mishnayot that talks about humans as kind of partners with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And God created the world, and so if we're looking at ourselves as God's partners, God put us in the world as the Torah says, "L'avdo l'shomro Shabbat Tov." Adam was put in the garden to serve it, to work it, and to protect it. And so our job here in this world is not to take from it, it's to take care of it and to be able to extend to the best, for the good, both our own lives and the lives of those around us and the resources of this world. So every person has zchuyot ve'avonot. Every individual has merits and sins. We're going to go with the translation here. A person whose merits are greater than their sins is termed tzaddik, righteous. A person whose sins exceed their merits is termed rasha, wicked. And if the sins and merits are equal, they are termed benoni, meaning right in the middle. This is not exactly like Tanya, which is Sefer Benoni, but as the Baal HaTanya says, that this is a borrowed term, right? And so borrowed from notions of in a Beit Din, for example, when a person is judged as being as not being guilty as charged, they're called tzaddik. Doesn't mean that they're somehow inherently righteous or wonderful, but with respect to that particular court case, they are tzaddik. You had a question.
Benoni here is the Hebrew word.
Yes,
it becomes a pronoun in time.
It becomes the protagonist in the Tanya, right? Sir.
The Tanya says that the Benoni does not sin. He has a desire to sin. But that's a very different thing. Action versus desire.
Yes. It's a very different thing, and there's a lot of the Rambam, I think, a lot of Rambam's writing is very consistent with that. That the idea is not to control our mind. The idea is that we'll just to understand our mind and to use that understanding properly to control our behavior, which is a challenge, right? The same applies to an entire country. If the merits of all of the inhabitants of a country exceed their sins, then the country is termed righteous. If their sins are greater, the country is termed wicked, and the same applies to the entire world. If a person's sins exceed their merits, they will immediately die because of their wickedness. Similarly, a country whose sins are great will immediately be obliterated, as we saw with Sodom and Gomorrah, for example. With regard to the entire world as well, if the sins of its inhabitants were greater than their merits, they would immediately be destroyed. As it says in Pashat Noach, Vayah Hashem ki rabba ra'at ha'adam ba'aretz, God saw the great wickedness of the evil of humanity was great, and God said, you know what, I've had it with these people, I'm going to destroy them.
Immediately is redundant.
Because?
Because it doesn't happen.
So it's not redundant, it's wrong. Well, I only work here. The reckoning is not calculated only on the basis of the number of merits and demerits or sins, but also takes into account their magnitude. I mean, this is, by the way, you're raising, like, the big question. Like, what are you talking about? You know, who judges? Obviously, the world is still in existence, Baruch Hashem. So, according to what we're reading here, just black and white, right? A simplistic approach to what Rambam is telling us. It means that the merits of the whole world must outweigh the sins of the whole world. So, what do you mean you look around and you see the world as wicked? Obviously, God doesn't judge the world as being wicked because we're still here. Or maybe miyad is lavdavka. Maybe immediately, not really immediately. Maybe, who knows? God said to Adam, the day that you eat the fruit, you're going to die. And Adam ate the fruit and he didn't die. So, the reckoning is not calculated only on the basis of the number of merits or sins, but also on their magnitude. Some merits outweigh many sins. And in contrast, one sin may outweigh many merits. The weighing of sins and merits is carried out according to the wisdom of the knowing God. God knows how to measure merits against sins. It says
there's no chart.
Well, it says in Pirkei Avot, you know, don't say, oh well, this is just a small mitzvah, or this is only a small avera, because you don't know the magnitude of the merit or the demerit that you're going to get for the action that you do or that you fail to do.
How does this relate with the 36? Was it 36 tzaddikim?
Yeah.
Does this relate to that? If those 36 people exist,
to
keep the world going?
I would imagine that the Lamed Vav tzaddikim is not part of Rambam's cosmos.
Okay.
I think it's not part of the world the way he sees it. So that's for a different shir. That's for a shir on Chassidus maybe.
Okay.
But I would say that there's a concept that's brought in the Gemara, for example, that the tzaddik is what sustains the city. So you have to have a tzaddik in the city, otherwise the city's going to be in danger, right? So the bigger the tzaddik living in the city, the more the city is protected, right? So there is a Talmudic basis for this whole notion of the Lamed Vavnikim, right? The idea being that if one person, whatever the scale is, the people are either wicked, which is a 1, or complete tzaddikim, which is a 10, right? So if everybody in the town is like a 4, but you have one tzaddik who's a 9. So the one tzaddik who's a 9, he's going to outweigh a lot of the other people who are 4s and keep the city alive, right? So similarly, if we have 36 of them in the world at any given time, and they're all 10s, then, So in terms of just like doing the arithmetic, I would say that fits into this schematic, right? But the idea of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim, I would say that's not part of Rambam's, the world that Rambam inhabits. Anyone who changes their mind about the mitzvot they've performed and regrets the merits that they've earned and saying, what value was there in doing them? I wish I hadn't performed them. Loses them all, and no merit is preserved for them at all. Right? So this only applies to a person who regrets their previous deeds. So it's a kind of you remember in the Superman comics Bizarro, right? The Bizarro world, right? So it's kind of the Bizarro version of Teshuvah. Right? Teshuvah, you say, I remember all of the averot that I did, all the sins I did, and I regret them, and I'll never do them again. And so you get credit. So similarly, God forbid a person says, you know what, I wasted my whole life being from. Shabbos, I wasted 1/7 of my life by doing the Shabbos nonsense. I can't believe all the money that I spent on kosher food that was 4 times as expensive as normal food. I wish I'd never done any of that. I regret it, forget it. Okay, so what Rambam is saying is like, God hears what we say. That our words have real power. Right? Remember how God creates the whole world, right? God, Vayomer. God says. And we are just like, so when it says Tselem Elohim, it's not just, Rambam has this whole thing about how it's, the intellect. Great. But also, like, look at Sefer Bereshit, look at the very first, the opening verses of the Torah, right? God says, when God articulates, what God does is God puts into motion, or actualizes the concept that is in God's mind. Does it through speech. And then God beholds it, vayar, and then God decides whether it meets the requirements or not. Vayar Elohim ki tov, and God saw that it was good. And the tov, I think, this is for a whole separate discussion, but I think that, there's a very strong argument to be made that all of the ki tov in the beginning of Parshat Bereshit is not that the world was perfect, or not even that the world completely corresponded to God's, if you will, concept, but it was good enough. That, we can go with this, right? Anybody who's ever done, completed a project, the concept of, the perfect is the enemy of the good, right? And you want something that's good enough to put out there, right? And it's never going to be completely perfect. And so I think there's an argument to be made that when it's the nature of existence, right? That the physical world can never be completely perfect, or can never be perfectly in tune with the concept. Anybody who's ever, created anything knows that, right? So we're getting off on a tangent. But the point is that, here he's saying that when we say, I regret, God hears that. We say, I regret all these sins, chatati, Anna Hashem Hatati, please God, listen to me, I sinned and I did this, and we have to do vidui devorim, we have to say, right? We have to enumerate. We've read this in the first two parakim, right? We have to enumerate the sins that we did and say, now I've resolved, I'm never going to do them again. And what he's saying is God's listening, and what we say matters. So this is what I said, achla'ot, the responsibility of bishvili nivra olam, the world is created for me. What I do in the world makes a difference in the world. And when I say to God, I really repent this, God says, great, I'm glad. And God forbid, when we say to God, or we say in the presence of God, because we don't have to turn to God and say, Anna Hashem, I'm sorry that I ever praised you, right? We just say, I wasted my time. God hears that too. Just as a person's merits and sins are weighed at the time of their death, so too the sins of every inhabitant of the world, together with their merits, are weighed on Rosh Hashanah. It's coming, folks. Mm-hmm. If one is found righteous, the verdict is sealed for life. If one is found wicked, the verdict is sealed for death. A Benoni's verdict remains tentative until Yom Kippur. If he repents, the verdict is sealed for life. If not, we're not even going to say it. Okay. Even though the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is a gzerat hakatuv, it's derived from biblical verses, right? It contains a remez, right? So, right, any trick question, right? Which pasuk in the Torah says blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? Anybody?
Yom Teruah.
That's the Gzerat HaKatuv, because it doesn't say blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, right? The time that the Torah tells us to blow the shofar is, extra credit, anybody know? The time that we're supposed to blow the shofar is at the end of Yom Kippur on the Yovel. So we're supposed to blow the shofar once every 50 years. Okay? Now, when is the Yovel? It's once every 50 years. Which year are we in right now? Nobody knows. So this might be the year of the Yovel. So we're going to blow the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur this year, just like we did last year, and Bezrat Hashem next year, right? Okay. And so it says that Truatem b'shofar, that you use the Truah on Yom Kippur, v'krata dror ba'aretz, right? And you cry freedom throughout the land, right? That's the shofar of the Yovel. And so because it says Truah at that shofar, what Jacob is saying is correct, that it's the Yom Truah, Yom Kippur, I'm sorry, Rosh Hashanah is Yom Truah. And so
we also say v'chatzotzrot b'kol shofar.
No.
It speaks of shofar also previously.
Chatzotzrot b'kol shofar.
V'chatzotzrot b'kol shofar.
Yeah.
V'yom simchatem.
Yeah, but it doesn't say blow the shofar. I'm just saying there's no pasuk that says on Rosh Hashanah you blow the shofar. The closest that comes is the pasuk that says Yom Truah. And so the rabbi said, Truah means the shofar. So Gzerat HaKatuv it's one of the legitimate ways that Chazal learn out halachas from psukim. I'm just saying but we have to understand that Rambam is pointing this out. He's saying, we don't have a pasuk that says blow the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, but we figured out that that's what the Torah wants us to do. Okay? And there's also a remez. There is a so in the footnote here, it's worth looking at. Rambam says there are two perspectives on the mitzvot. The first views the mitzvot as divine decrees which transcend human understanding. And in contrast, the second attitude maintains that though the source of the Torah is God's will, which transcends our comprehension, the purpose of the Torah is to refine the world. Accordingly, each mitzvah has a reason and a rationale that we can employ while striving to reach this goal. And so, what's the purpose of blowing the shofar? And what he's saying here is, the purpose is, there's a hint. It says, wake up, you sleepy ones, wake up from your sleep, you who slumber, arise, inspect your deeds, repent, remember your Creator. Those who forget the truth and the vanities of time and throughout the entire year devote their energies to vanity and emptiness, which will not benefit or save. Look to your souls, improve your ways and your deeds, and let every one of you abandon the evil path and thoughts. Right? So we're, those of us who say Slichot the entire Chodesh Elul, I'm in shul this morning at 5 o'clock, and we're saying Slichot and we're blowing the shofar. And it's the Gewalt when you hear the shofar at 10 after 5 in the morning. Hashem, Kerach, it's like, it's powerful, right? Okay? Accordingly, throughout the entire year, a person should always look at themselves as equally balanced between merit and sin. The world is equally balanced between merit and sin. If one performs one sin, he tips the balance, and that of the entire world, to the side of guilt, and brings destruction upon himself. And by the way, and on the entire world. Right? So it's, again, we're seeing how each one of us, at every moment, is responsible for the entire world. Because remember, Rambam does not agree with Yehuda Halevi that by virtue of being born physically Jewish with Jewish biological DNA, nothing special. We are not innately, inherently superior to other human beings. We are in a position of having inherited a superior teaching, the Torah. And so our obligation is not just to sit back and say, I'm a Jew, I'm better, and therefore the world is going to come to me. But we're in a position of an obligation to say, what does God need me to do right at this minute to keep the world alive? Now it's like the stakes are really high. Now it's not just like, am I going to go to heaven, or am I going to get the extra points in Olam Haba? Now Rambam is saying, no, it's like, that's how high the stakes are. It's not just, God forbid, that I'm going to sacrifice my own life. But every sin that I commit tips the balance of the entire world. Similarly, if he performs one mitzvah, he tips his balance and that of the entire world to the side of merit, and brings deliverance and salvation to himself and others. For these reasons, it is customary for all of Israel to give profusely to charity, to perform many good deeds, and to be occupied with mitzvot from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur to a greater extent than during the remainder of the year. During these 10 days, the custom is for everyone to rise while still night and pray in the synagogues with heart-rending words of supplication until daybreak. Those of you who haven't experienced the Sephardi Slichot, you guys should come one morning. It's a real knockout. It's the energy is incredibly high, and if you experience it once or twice, you'll understand why people do it. Okay, so we do it, for 6 weeks. It's a long time, from beginning of Elul until Yom Kippur, but it's very, very powerful. This is it's a fascinating reminder of that we live in a world of space, time, and motion. We live in the physical world, in the material world, right? I mean, yes, nobody would argue, oh, God is everywhere. Oh, God is accessible at all times. Oh, God. But Rambam is saying, beferish. He's saying, actually, 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that's the special moment. That's when God is uniquely accessible, right? We learned this, I think, last week in the second parak, right? That when we pray by ourselves, God sometimes will, quote unquote, hear our prayers, and sometimes maybe not so clearly. When we pray the minyan, God hears all our prayers. And the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, like Teshuvah is on sale. God is like the doors are wide open and it's come, right? Right? We're getting a 2-for-1 special here. But by the way, it's like, I don't know how early any of you gets up in the morning. I always get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so it's not such a big deal for me. But yeah, so you all should come. You should come. It's like, anyway, it's worth it. When a person's sins are being weighed against his merits, God does not count a sin that was committed only once or twice. Now, this is a very kind of a weird paragraph, weird halakha that he's talking about here. And I'm just going to give it over for what it is, and we're going to, I'll leave it to all of you to try to figure it out, to see what kind of sense it makes. A sin is only counted if it was committed 3 times or more. In American legal system, for example, you have this concept where like somebody gets arrested for disorderly conduct, right? And they get taken out of the police station. They're not booked. They're given what's called a desk appearance ticket. Okay, and that means that on a certain date they have to show up in front of the judge. They show up in front of the judge, and the judge looks at the file and says, "Well, you have no priors. You were never arrested before. This is not like really a big deal, but like you caught the attention of the police enough that you're standing here in front of me today. All right." Basically, the judge says, "Go and sin no more." And if for 6 months the person has no run-ins with the law or whatever, then the file is like it never existed, right? But if they're arrested again, like a couple of weeks later, drunk and disorderly or whatever, then that revives. Then the desk appearance ticket actually turns into a charge. Okay, so Rambam is saying kind of like God works the same way as like the court system, that that you have no priors, you did something, we also have like a concept that Chazal talk about. The Gemara says a person who does a sin a certain number of times, it becomes a halacha for them. Right, 3 times is a chazaka also, exactly, right? So so he's saying that if a sin is only counted if it's committed 3 times or more. If it's found that even those sins committed more than 3 times outweigh a person's merits, the sins that were committed twice are also added, and he's judged for all the sins, as we said, right? So we commit a sin 3 times, you get demerit for the 3rd time.
He means yearly, or what?
Good question. I'm not sure that there's a time frame. I'm not sure that there's a time limit. I don't know. It's a good question. If the merits are equal or greater than the sins committed, which were committed more than 3 times, God forgives these sins one after the other. The 3rd is forgiven because it's considered as a first sin, and the 2 previous sins were already forgiven. Right? Similarly, after the 3rd sin is forgiven, the 4th is then considered a first, and it's forgiven according to the same principle. And that same pattern is continued until all the sins are concluded. Okay? When does this apply with regard to an individual? Okay? As, for example, in the book of Job, Eov, all these things God will do twice or 3 times with a man. However, with regard to a community, retribution for the 1st and 2nd and 3rd sins is held in abeyance. על 3 פשעי ישראל ועל 4 לא אשיבנו. Says in Amos, for 3 sins of Israel I will withhold retribution, but for the 4th I will not withhold it. When a reckoning of the merits and sins of a community is made according to this pattern, the reckoning begins from the 4th sin. Again, so this is, to cut through the arithmetic and all the reasoning, the Torah is Dacheha Dachenoam, right? The Torah understands that human nature is, again, by definition, the levels of sin, right? The sin, which is the lowest level, we made a mistake. We're not perfect. We tried, or we forgot that we were trying to be good, and something happened. Okay, you don't want it to happen over and over and over again, because then all of a sudden it becomes a pattern, and then it's more than just I made a mistake. Because if we made a mistake and it's brought to our attention that we made the mistake, and then we acknowledge that we made the mistake and we understand how we made the mistake, then we do it a second time, that should tell us that, I'm making this mistake more than once. I need to do some kind of a inner, cheshbon nefesh. So I need to explore myself internally and figure out what it is that I'm doing wrong, why I keep doing this, right? If we fail to follow up on that, we're going to do it a third time. At which point God is going to say, dude, once is a mistake. Twice is it's already a pattern. And you should have learned from that. Right? Benoni is one whose scale is equally balanced between merit and sin. However, if among his sins is, for example, the neglect of the mitzvah of tefillin, such that he never wore tefillin even once in his life, he's judged according to his sins. However, he will be granted a portion in Olam Haba. Similarly, all the wicked whose sins are greater than their merits are judged according to their sins, but they are granted a portion in Olam Haba. Because all Israel have a share in the world to come. Ve'amech kulam tzadikim le'olam yireshu aretz. And your nation, they are all righteous, and they shall inherit the land forever. Now, Eretz zo mashal. This word Eretz, land, is a metaphor. Klomar, Eretz HaChaim, the land of life, the world to come. Similarly, the pious of the nations of the world have a portion in the world to come. There's an awful lot going on in this couple of sentences, okay? First of all, I think we can make a case, and I'm not, just talking about text and our history, right? We can make a case, and it was certainly made in Mishnaic times, in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, for example. We can make a case that whenever the Tanakh talks about living in the land, living in Eretz, living in the Adamah, that it's actually talking about physical life in the physical land of Israel, in the Jewish polity, state, whatever you want to call it, the Jewish homeland in the land of Israel, right? And there was, to the extent that when groups that started talking a lot about, for example, Tchiat HaMetim as part of their whole hashkafa, as part of their whole approach, the Tchiat HaMetim, the concept was that we're going to come back into these physical bodies and we're going to live here in the land of Israel, and it's going to be our land forever. Okay, so now Rambam is talking in a time when not only was there no land of Israel accessible, or barely accessible to us, even those Jews who came here, there was never a chance that it was going to become a Jewish nation state, or whatever. There's no such thing as a nation state at the time, but it was never going to become a Jewish kingdom or a Jewish community. Again, there were going to be Jews living here. There were Jews living here. It was not an easy time. It was not an easy life for them. Okay? However, the notion of Olam Haba came increasingly to the fore. So here he's saying, so this is like a roundabout way of saying that I think when we look at Yeshayahu at the beginning, he says, Amech kolam tzadikim le'olam yireshu aretz, your nation who are all righteous, they will inherit the land forever. I think that the first reading of that is that we're going to come back into our physical bodies and we're going to live here. And Rambam is saying, well, we can also read that as Olam Haba, which I think there's a historical argument that the notion of Olam Haba kind of has to replace the notion of returning to the physical land, because Rambam's writing this, there hasn't been Jews living in this or in control of life in this part of the world for 1,000 years. Okay. Similarly, all the wicked whose sins are greater than their merits are judged according to their sins, and I'm sorry, who said that? Okay, but also. But also, very important point, right? Ken Hasidei Umot Ha'olam, the righteous people of the nations of the world, righteous Goyim, also have a portion in Olam Haba. So, very important. Olam Haba is a spiritual plane on which we get a special ticket because we are descended from Abraham. Okay, but it's not exclusively for us. It's you can earn it by being righteous. The following individuals do not have a portion in Olam Haba. Their souls are cut off, and they are judged for their great wickedness and sins forever. Okay, So first of all, Rambam catches a lot of grief about this, especially right after he dies, from the rabbi. I think we spoke about this last time. Notably from the rabbis in Provence, in the south of France, which always had there were always like very significant hashkafic differences between the rabbis in Spain and the rabbis in France, because the rabbis in Spain were more part of the Muslim world, where 90% of the Jews in the world lived, pretty much from the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash until the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and 1,000 years of that period, give or take, or 900 years that period, it was the Muslim world, right, from the year 628. They basically said, wait, so based on this, we're saying, Rambam is saying that you either get Olam Haba or you don't. Meaning that Rambam doesn't believe in heaven and hell. So why heaven and hell is such an important part should be such an important part of the Jewish hashkafa is a question for scholars of medieval Jewish philosophy. But there was a very strong belief in this whole notion of heaven and hell among the rabbis of Provence. If I had to guess, which I am guessing, part of it is the influence of they lived in a Christian in the world of Christianity. Rambam and his other contemporaries lived in the world of Islam, right? So heaven, hell, all this, the afterlife. Yes, it was also a big part of Islam, but there was a very strong, I think Rambam inherits a tradition where the notion of heaven and hell is not really important at best, and maybe not at all accurate. Whereas the rabbis of Provence, they really took him to task over this. And as we said last time, Ramban finally came to Rambam's defense. He said, listen, none of you was on the Madrega on the level of being able to write a halachic work on the level of Mishneh Torah. So leave him alone. He didn't say he does believe, he just said, you can't attack this man. But it's very powerful, because you think about it, he's saying the following individuals don't have a portion in the world to come, and if Olam Haba is what we're striving for, what could be worse than not getting it? All right, so the people who say, like, when you're dead, you're dead. This is Esav, right? Esav comes in, and he says, I'm so hungry. Give me your stew. I want a mouthful of stew. What does he say? Hareini holech lamut. Behold, I'm going to die. He doesn't say I'm going to drop dead right now if I don't eat. I'm starving. He says, you know what? When you're dead, you're dead. What do I care? After, the birthright, the thing, afterlife. He says, nonsense. When you're dead, you're dead. Rambam is saying, there's nothing worse than that. And these are the people who don't get Olam Haba. The minim, we'll work on these, okay. The epikorsim, those who deny the Torah, those who deny the resurrection of the dead and the coming of Mashiach, those who rebel against God, those who cause many to sin, those who separate themselves from the community, those who proudly commit sins in public, as Yehoiakim did, those who betray Jews to Gentile authorities, Mumar, those who cast fear upon the people for reasons other than the service of God, murderers, slanderers, and one who extends his foreskin so as to appear not circumcised, which apparently was a thing that Jewish men did in
Egypt,
in Egypt, or in the world of Greece and Rome, apparently. Okay. So, minim and apikorsim, we're going to explain in just a moment. Okay. 5 individuals are described as minim. Min. Okay. Let me just check this. 464. Right. Okay. Rambam in Hilchot Teshuvah, Rambam difference. He says the min is a person who does not believe in God, and apikors is one who doesn't believe in the Torah. Okay. Here we say minim are a person who says there is no God, no ruler of the world. A person who accepts the concept of a ruler but maintains that there are 2 or more. A person who accepts that there is one master of the world but maintains that this master of the world has a body or a form. The rabbis of Provence went crazy over this. And the Ravid attacks Rambam very, very, very harif about this. He says, What are you talking about? He says, there are wiser hachamim, bigger rabbis than you who talked about God having a physical body. Who are you to say that they're minim? How dare you? You can disagree with them, but to call them minim? He says, no, sorry. One who maintains that God was not the sole first being and creator of all existence. One who serves a star or a constellation or another entity so that it will serve as an intermediary between him and the eternal God. By the way, that is his fundamental definition of avodah zarah, is not saying that there is no God, but saying that no, we're going to serve an intermediary. That we remember we.
So the Christians are minim.
Yes, the Trinitarian Christians are definitely, according to the Rambam, are minim. Yes, that's exactly it. They have an intercessor, and they pray to the intercessor, and sometimes they pray to the intercessor's mother. Right? All of these 5 individuals is a min. 3 individuals are described as epikursing. One who denies the existence of prophecy and maintains that there is no knowledge communicated from God to the hearts of men. One who disputes the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, and one who maintains that the Creator is not aware of the deeds of men. Each of these 3 individuals is an epikuros. So remember, we said that the 13 principles, right? The Yigdal, right? The 13 principles are divided, broadly speaking, into 3 groups that, talk about the nature of God, about the nature of prophecy, and about reward and punishment. Okay? Interesting, he says here that a person who says that the Creator is not aware excuse me, of the deeds of people. שהאומר שאין הבורא יודע מעשה בני האדם. So remember last time we focused on Rambam talking about God having this, what I call, what my friend Rechavia Joe, Professor Joe, calls super omniscience, right? That God, it's one thing to say God knows everything that's going on. It's another thing to say God knows everything that will go on, right? And it's not. I think that Rambam, at least at a kind of at a simple level, maybe a simplistic level. I apologize, but that Rambam, there's a case to be made that Rambam believes that God foresees all of my actions, and yet I have free will. That not just that God foresees my actions. So to me, the fact that if I say that God knows what I'm going to do before I do it, that doesn't mean I don't have free will. It just means that God has a great predictive method, right? That God has, like stock traders have algorithms that predict where prices are going to go. God's got the best algorithm. He knows what we're going to do before we do it. It doesn't mean that we don't choose to do it, okay? But there are many who fold that back into not just that God already knows what we're going to do, but also that God has already planned what we're going to do. And there are some interpreters of Rambam who I think come perilously close to that, and Rambam goes to great lengths in this particular sefer to tell us that nothing we do is predetermined. Okay? So I want to be very careful to make sure that we keep that in mind, that nothing, according to Rambam, nothing we do is predetermined. At the same time, Rambam is very much pushing this notion of super omniscience, which is not clearly, stated in the Torah, and it's not clearly stated in Chazal, and it was not universally accepted at his time, and it's not universally accepted now. Okay, so the fact that Rambam pushes this and makes it a big, like in Pirkei Avot, we have the famous Pirkei Avot where Rabbi Akiva says everything is seen, hakol tzafui, ve'hareshut naton. Everything is tzafui. That word means like Har HaTzofim, right? Mount Scopus means it's like lookout mountain. It's when you stand on that mountain, you look and you see everything. Okay, and kind of until Rambam's time, that was translated as everything is seen, and then from Rambam's time on, it's everything is foreseen. Right, and even today, like Bilti Tzipui, it was unexpected. Right, we use the word now in modern Hebrew basically to mean foreseen, expected. But it's not clear that that's what that means. Okay, Ibn Kaspi, who lived shortly, he was born, I think, like 60, 70 years after Rambam died, so maybe. I think it was like 1280. He had a very clear, and he was an influential thinker, and he basically said that all foreknowledge, not just of the Nevi'im, but also for God's foreknowledge, is probabilistic. And so I think the way that we can describe that is to say, you're walking on a path, and you don't know where that path leads. But the person standing up on top of the mountain sees all the paths. And so the person standing on the mountain knows the path that you chose, knows what alternatives that will lead you to. And knows, if you choose one alternative, what that will in turn lead you to, and what that will in turn lead you to. And so sees all of the possibilities or the probabilities unfolding before we see them, right? It doesn't mean that person, or God even, on the mountaintop, actually knows which path we're going to choose. But once we do choose a path, then that person knows where that's going to lead. Okay? Just to throw that out there, okay? 3 individuals are considered as kofrim, as people who deny the Torah. One who says that the Torah, even one verse or one word of the Torah, is not from God. If a person says, Moshe made these statements independently, that person is a kofir. He's denying the Torah. One who denies the Torah's interpretation, the oral law, or disputes the authority of its spokesman, as did Tzadok and Baitus. We'll come back in a moment. One who says that though the Torah came from God, the Creator has replaced one mitzvah with another and nullified the original Torah, like the Arabs and the Christians. Okay? Each of these 3 individuals is considered as one who denies the Torah.
Excuse me. He speaks also about the Muslims, but they are not considered Rechavia.
No, but they deny the Torah. They are.
Yes.
Yes.
The Torah.
They are actual. In Rambam's view, they are legitimate monotheists.
Yes.
But we spoke about this before, that they are legitimate monotheists, but they do not worship and serve the right God or do it properly.
Like we can say Allahu Akbar.
Yeah.
If you say they don't worship the proper God, and if you say Allahu Akbar, it's not the proper God.
But they're monotheists. No,
They
you know,
believe in a God.
yes, they believe in a single God. And Rambam would say
But
that...
it is a different God. If it is only one, we should not say Allahu Akbar. And we are even allowed to pray in a Muslim mosque.
Right, because they're monotheists. Right?
The church.
Why would
Sorry?
you have to do the church? I mean, they're monotheists too, aren't they?
Well, according to Rambam, again, where he lived in the world of, he lived in a world of Trinitarian Christianity. And so for him, Christianity was not a monotheistic religion. Just as for Islam, Christianity is not a monotheistic religion. It's a polytheistic religion, or an avodah zarah, because they have an intercessor. They pray to Jesus and the saints and so on, or Mary, or so on. Right.
It's the statues on the wall.
Well, yeah. Anyway. So Tzadok and Baitus is interesting. This is discussed in Pirkei Avot and in Avot Rabbi Natan. Antignos Ish Socho, who is early on in the Zugot in the beginning of Pirkei Avot, and he says, don't be like students who serve a master in order to receive a reward. He says, be like servants who serve a master not in order to receive a reward. And in Avot Rabbi Natan, he said that Tzadok and Baitus either misunderstood or they purposely misinterpreted. And instead of saying, be like servants who serve the master not in order to receive a reward, they said, be like servants who serve the master in order to not receive a reward? Meaning, there's no such thing as reward and punishment? Why are we doing all this? Why are we serving God if we're not going to get a reward? And so they broke off, according to Avot Rabbi Natan, and they started their own little cults. They began splinter groups which rejected the core of Jewish practice and coveted material wealth. They found they could not convince the majority of people to reject the Torah entirely, so they adopted a different tactic. They claimed that they were true to the Torah, but the only Torah that was the godly way was the written law, and that the oral law they maintained was a human invention. Okay, so perhaps the reason that Rambam focuses on them is because in his mind they're forerunners of the of the Karaites, which he also has a big problem with, and part of his whole program in the guide in particular is to push back against Karaism, which was also kind of very widespread at his time.
What was the group to which you were referring? Group of Rabbi Natan?
There's a sefer, a book called Avot de Rabbi Natan.
Okay.
There's Pirkei Avot, and then there's like a different version of it called Avot de Rabbi Natan, and that has this whole story of Tzadok and Baitus in it. The Tzdukim, right, who come from the name Tzadok. So, a person who says that the Torah came from God, but the Creator replaced one mitzvah with another and nullified the original Torah. So, by the way, the opening surah of the Quran, the very beginning, Al-Fatiha of the Quran, it says, lead us in the right path, not like the ones who got all confused because they're stupid, which is the Christians, or the ones who get you angry, which is us. We got God angry according to the Quran because God gave us the right word and then we twisted it around to suit our own needs. And Christians are just stupid because they had the word but they couldn't figure out what it meant. So Allah came and revealed the Quran to Muhammad, and then everything was fine. Okay, so he's writing in the Muslim world. Okay, and he's saying, don't buy it, don't buy it. Among Israel, there are two categories of apostates.
How did the Muslims respond to Maimonides?
He most of his life, when he was around, I think 13, 14 years old, the Almohads arose in Cordoba, and they were very Kharif. They were very violent. They decided that they had to get rid of anybody who did not completely conform to their brand of Islam. And needless to say, the Jews especially did not conform to their brand of Islam. So so that's when his family left Spain, and they went to they ended up in Egypt. Okay, and so for most of his life, as I understand it, Rambam was living in a much more open and accepting society. Also, the fact that he was a very important Jew, right? He was the court physician to the Khalif, to Salah ad-Din, right? Salah ad-Din had two senior doctors, right? One of them was Rambam in Egypt, and when he came here, he had a doctor who was called, anybody? Sheikh Jarrah.
Maccabi.
Sheikh Jarrah, right here, Maccabi. So, the neighborhood over here in East Jerusalem, right? Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh is like a learned person or a senior person. Jarrah is a surgeon. So he was the other doctor, right? So Rambam was, the Jewish population, the Jewish community was tolerated, and he was the Nagid, he was the head of the Jewish community. And so he spent his days at the court, taking care of the families of the Muslim nobility, and then at the end of the day, he would get on his horse and ride back, and he would sit down and spend the whole afternoon and evening tending to the needs of the Jewish community. He writes this letter, this very famous letter, where he talks about, you think my life is so easy? He says, I get up in the morning, I get on my horse and I ride to the court. I spend the whole day with these goyim and I take care of all their problems. Then I get on the horse and I ride back and I have a little something to eat. And then next thing all the Yidden come in and everybody's got their questions and their problems. And then finally I get a few hours of sleep and the next morning I get up and I start all over again. He was an amazing man. So, the simple answer is, I think he didn't show this to the Muslims, But, they left him largely to do his own thing with the Jewish community. The Jewish community was, as I say, not just tolerated, but they found value in in certain members of the community, like Rambam, who were able to perform a valuable service for the court. There throughout our history, there have been people like Abarbanel, for example, who was like the equivalent of he was the minister of finance of Iberia, and when they threw us out in 1492, they said, "But you can stay," because he said, "No, thanks, man, I'm going to go with my people," and he ended up left and went to Italy. Among Israel, there are two categories of apostates, of mishumadim, right? An apostate with regard to a single mitzvah, and an apostate with regard to the entire Torah. An apostate with regard to a single mitzvah is someone who has made a practice of willfully committing a particular sin to the point where he's accustomed to committing it, and his deeds are public knowledge. This applies even though the sin is one of the minor ones. For example, someone who has made a practice of always wearing shatnez, or of cutting off his, shaving up his sideburns, so that it appears that with regard to him, it is as if this mitzvah has been nullified entirely. Such a person is considered an apostate with regard to that matter, and this applies only if he commits the sin with the intent of angering God. Okay. An example of apostate with regard to the entire Torah is one who turns to the faith of the Gentiles when they act harsh decrees against the Jews and clings to them, saying, "What value do I have in clinging to Israel when they are debased and pursued? It's better to cling to those who have the upper hand."
Would it be wrong to say the apostate is a Jewish non-Jew?
I'm trying to remember the specific. We talked about this way back. At what point does a Jew? What's the point of no return? Right? I'd have to go back and double check because there is a point. Sorry?
I don't think there is.
No, according to Rambam, there definitely is. According to Rambam, there definitely is.
What's it possible? A man can return until the day of his death.
Can do teshuvah, yes, but that's between him and God. But there are Jews who, once they publicly embrace another religion and publicly denigrate Judaism and the Torah, and I'd have to go back and double check this specific. No, but there are Jews who we never accept back into the community. So there are a Jewish man who crosses whatever this point of no return is, like goes and becomes a Catholic priest and then decides, oh, I've had it with the church. We don't count him for a minion. Don't give him an aliyah. Well, he'd have to go through.
Change their garb
from our perspective, halachically, they would have to go through a process. He couldn't just take off his collar and come back and say, I changed my mind. I want an aliyah. Sorry. According to Rambam.
Okay, that's it.
And again, the notion, the Indian of like deathbed teshuvah, which is very powerful, right? But that's between the individual and God.
Is that individual a Jew? Even though the individual may have been a priest or whatever.
Well,
it says Yisrael afiu shechata.
But there's difference between chata and
no, chata means going over to the other side. That's one interpretation.
There's 3 levels of it.
That's one interpretation.
He's saying that a person, God forbid, right, a Jew who particularly during times of persecution, right, who says, I reject the Torah because look what good it did us. I don't have anything to do with it. I'm out of here. I'm going to take on holy orders and God, Dominus Dominus, right?
Had a Jewish pope, didn't we?
He says, yes. And he says that person is a kofar with respect to the entire Torah, and this person loses Olam Haba. He's giving us a list of people who lose Olam Haba.
Excuse me, I might be wrong, but did not Rambam himself?
It's entirely possible, according to many historians. It's not just possible, but according to many historians, it's highly likely that Rambam and his family, during the period of the Almohad persecution, outwardly converted to or took on the practices of Islam. And Rambam also writes in his letter to Taiman that, Islam is not actually Avodah Zarah, they're monotheists. Category of those who cause the many to sin includes those who cause them to commit a severe sin, like Tzadok and Baitus.
Was Elisha ben Abuya a kofar? Or just a sinner?
Different people have different views of him. Different people have different views of him, whether it's kofer or an apikoros or just a rasha. I've heard some rabbis say, "Oh, well, he was just a rasha because he knew, and yet he rejected."
Doesn't mean it might be not sufficient.
Yeah. So
Paolo Cristiani also he knew.
Yeah. I'd have to dust off my. I have a whole.
Why I'm asking? Because at the end, I think it was Rabbi Meir who pardoned him.
Yeah, well, it was his Rabbi.
Okay.
Right, but I think my interpretation of that, which is again like a separate issue, but my interpretation, or which I think I have very, very good grounds for making the case. And I don't want to go into it. We're going to try to finish up another one or two halachas here. We're not going to get to the end of the parak today, but the next halacha is worth looking at. Is that Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, at the end, like B'sofo shel davar, at the end of the day, he served God out of fear and not out of love. Because he says, wait a minute, this is the reward of the Torah? Right? So he was not on the Madrega for all his knowledge and the greatness of his knowledge and of his teaching, right? He was not on the Madrega of giving himself over to God. He said, no, wait, what's in it for me? He saw the guy fall and break his neck, right?
So what?
So he said,
So what? If he did it only because of fear, so what?
So it's, it's like this is what happens when we're not...
99% of the people.
I'm not criticizing him, right? I'm just saying this is my interpretation, my understanding of why, of what's happened, the way it's laid out in the Gemara. He sees the fire above the heads of the Chachamim when they're learning Torah, and he says, I want that too, right? So his first reaction to Torah is, what's in it for me? I can have the fire over my head. And then he looks later on, and he says, wait a minute, this guy did all the mitzvahs, and he went up to climb and to chase the mother bird away, and he fell and he died. That's the reward of Torah? So it's all about what's in it for me. Look, again, I'm not criticizing him. I'm just saying this is like my analysis of the facts as they're presented in the Gemara. So my understanding is that this is...
I would say it's logic.
No, but like Balatanya, separates us into, people who serve out of fear or serve out of love. So fear is this whole broad spectrum of what's in it for me. Reward and punishment, right?
According to Rambam, it was logic.
But reward and punishment is, that's like the side of fear. Am I making sense? Right? Versus love, which transcends that. Right? I don't worship God so that I can have a Mercedes. I worship God.
What is the position of Rambam about love?
We talked about that way back. It's at the beginning. Well, it's like at the beginning of it's all the way back.
No, the Babisher Rabbi.
No, Babisher Rabbi is not too deep there. I'm speaking of Rambam.
Yeah, but
I was just going to say the Babisher Rabbi says that serving out of fear is much more important because fear is a transformation of the side inside of ourselves instead of suppression. When we suppress, it still exists, it's still there, it's just waiting for the right time to come out. But we can transform it to that part inside of ourselves, and then we can use the advantages that it allows us to have in order to serve.
okay, good, thank you. Sorry, so at the beginning of Hilchot Teshuvah, what is the path to attain love and fear of God? All right, it's a mitzvah to love and fear, right? So. הנכבד והנורא הזה, מצווה לאהבו וליראתו. It's a mitzvah to both love and to fear God, right? Because it says, ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך. And it says, את אדוני אלוהיך תראה. Right? So it brings them together. What's the path to attain love and fear of God? When a person contemplates God's wondrous and great deeds and creations and appreciates God's infinite wisdom that surpasses comparison, that person will immediately love and praise and glorify God. yearning with tremendous desire to know God's great name.
Excuse me. In this case, what he's saying, the love is a consequence
Yes.
of his thought.
Yes. Of
again,
perception.
the thought comes before the love.
But you can't love something you don't perceive.
So, going back to Elisha ben Abuya, he couldn't perceive it.
What he perceived was, I'm just going just based on the incidents that are recounted in this whole story in the Gemara, right? He saw these guys learning Torah, and he saw the fire over there, and he said, "Gewalt, I want that fire over my head too."
Yeah.
Right? And then he got the fire over his head, but actually he doesn't get the fire until he dies, right? Because when he dies, the Rabbi Meir goes to his grave, and then they see the fire. So he gets it, but it's like, listen, he was one of the greatest in our history. There's no question about it. And did he, go down a wrong path? No question about that. Right? It doesn't negate. I mean, he was Rabbi Meir's teacher, not for nothing. Right? So yes, so there's perception which leads to the which leads to engendering feelings of love and desire to connect to God. Right? And at the same time, fear and love in Rambam's world here, the fear of God and loving God are really, really, really close. They're intertwined. He brings the two of them together in the same halacha, right? Right? So he's saying, we have these two psukim. They're not in contradiction to one another, right? However, I think Rambam will agree also, although I think Rambam will agree with Baal HaTanya, right? That ideally, I think the way, maybe the way that Rambam expresses it more, that serving God out of love, is in his concept of lishma, right? That we do mitzvot. No, but it's not understanding. That we do mitzvot for their own sake. So this is more an act of love. It's not an act of fear. We don't do the mitzvah because we don't do a mitzvah because if I don't do this mitzvah, I'm going to get punished. And we don't do it because I know that if I do this mitzvah, then I'll get a reward. We do it because God says God wants us to do these mitzvot. Okay, so that's I think Rambam doesn't express himself with a lot of passion.
You're not getting the reward.
Well, when you feel you're not getting the reward, no, I would say something else. I would say something else. We're going to have to stop here. So this is a good place for us to start next week.